It may be years before we're able to assess all the damage caused by those winds of destruction that roared through coastal Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida during the darkness of September 12th and 13th. For most of us, during the pre-dawn hours, there were times when we felt isolated as this section of what used to be the Dauphin Island Causeway. But all of that quickly changed as soon as we saw the response from our neighbors from all across the nation. And that's what this story is all about. The devastation caused by Frederic's winds of destruction. It all began on August 30th, when a tropical depression was spotted off the African coast, more than 1,000 miles from Mobile. It grew into a tropical storm, then became a full-fledged hurricane. WALA television had begun to track Frederic on its color radar, and as the movement showed no change of direction, and the hurricane began to gather strength from the warm waters of the Gulf, civil defense, state and local officials began to prepare for the worst. At the Mobile office of the National Weather Service, local spokesmen began to reissue statements reinforcing those already being handed down by the National Hurricane Center in Miami.
Clouds from Hurricane Frederic are increasing, and Mobile, like the rest of the world, know these skies could become violent at any time. The death toll from Hurricane David has reached 1,500, and it continues to climb. 150-mile-per-hour winds ripped through the Dominican Republic 2 weeks ago, leaving behind an estimated $3 billion in damage. Officials at the National Weather Service here in Mobile hope to prevent that kind of damage in the United States. That's why they're keeping a close watch on Frederic. Winds from Hurricane Frederic have increased 30 miles per hour in the last 8 hours. And officials here say it's time Gulf Coast residents began to prepare for the worst.
Well, there is a chance it will because, well, it's packing 110-plus mile-per-hour winds now, and the Gulf at this time of the year, the Gulf of Mexico in September, is a fine area for intensification of storms. Now, this doesn't mean that we feel we're going to have a Camille or anything like that on our hands, because a 110-mile-an-hour storm is a pretty vicious storm.
Officials here at the Weather Service predict Hurricane Frederic will come to shore. However, how much damage he does will depend on how well Gulf Coast residents are prepared. Renee Dowles, TV 10 Newsbeat.
The hurricane continued to gain strength during the night of September the 11th, and by the time the morning of the 12th arrived, many low-lying coastal areas had already been ordered evacuated. Those who had not already boarded up windows were doing so. People began to stock up on foodstuffs and batteries and sought shelter. Preparations were made calmly and orderly, always with a wishful thought that Frederic would not strike the coast, that it would disappear. But the preparations were made and official orders obeyed.
Most of downtown Pensacola is also evacuated because of the wind, which is threatening to blow me away right now and is blowing much water across the bridge leading to Gulf Breeze and into the town of Gulf Breeze itself. Frederic hit Escambia County with a vengeance. Before dark, the city of Pensacola was being pounded with heavy rains and high winds. Bridges were impassable, and police were forbidding travel to Gulf Breeze. 20,000 people had left their homes and businesses, either voluntarily or by police order. Downtown Pensacola was deserted, all businesses closed, their windows protected from Frederic's winds. Many of the 20,000 are in shelters like this one at a high school. People began moving into those at noon. By nightfall, many of them were full. Families did what they could to make themselves comfortable, bringing food for the long stay.
Oh, not much. Just what's in this bag here, flashlight and orange, apple, bananas. That's all.
Are you worried a lot about your house while you're gone?
Yes, in a way. Well, not too much. I'm scared the roof or something will blow, but that's about it.
The Red Cross is providing coffee for the evacuees, along with food and shelter. What sort of things do you have set up for them here?
Well, they have all the food and all their dinners that can be done, that they can eat, and they can find their own place to rest, and if they bring all their blankets, they can sit down and find a place and get comfortable.
It may not have all the comforts of home, and it is kind of crowded, but at the very least, it's warm and it is dry, and it's as good a place as any to ride out Hurricane Frederic until everything is safe once again at home in Pensacola. At the shelter in Pensacola, Mike Sampson, TV 10 Newsbeat.
Approximately 50,000 people have been evacuated from the low areas bordering the Gulf as Hurricane Frederic nears. Thousands left by car, but others, not wanting to leave the area completely, are finding their way to shelters. The Fairhope ambulance services traveling from shelter to shelter offering aid.
See, a lot of these people I've had as patients before, and I know quite a bit of their medical history. So what I'm doing is telling some of these people who mans the armory or the different shelters what to do in different situations.
Everyone here is prepared to spend the night, and there is order. Are you frightened tonight?
Not really. No.
You're not?
Because it can kill a lot of people.
Approximately 20 miles away, Gulf Shores has been sealed off. The streets are empty except for official cars. Over 10,000 people have left their homes and businesses, and officials say there was really no resistance to the evacuation. Hurricane Frederic's power was evident on the waterfront. Waves over 7 feet high already are tearing away what man has built, and the water can be seen spilling over the breakfront and inching its way down the streets. Gulf Shores Command Post has been set up at the police station. Electric power went out early, and the emergency unit pressed into service. But here, officials report they have done all they can. Now they can only wait. Dick Darby, TV10 Newsbeat at Gulf Shores.
Here in Pascagoula, the water's already coming up over some of the roads. The real problem areas here are expected to be generally south of Highway 90 and some areas along the Pascagoula River. Evacuations started early this morning. About 25 to 30,000 people in Jackson County are being advised to go to higher ground.
Please be evacuated now before all roads become completely impassable.
Jackson County Disaster Services officials say most of the lower lying areas have already been evacuated.
Shelters are available for the general public throughout the county, and so basically we have gone just about as far as we can go as the situation stands at the present moment.
People in Pascagoula were still busy boarding up homes early this afternoon, while most businesses downtown were already closed and that area almost deserted. One bottleneck has developed around the Pascagoula River drawbridge, as boats heading for safe harbor are keeping the bridge open more than usual. The Emergency Services Office is broadcasting shelter locations and other critical information over Jackson County radio stations throughout the day. In Pascagoula, I'm Alan Green, TV10 Newsbeat.
It's now just after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The skies have begun to blacken just a bit behind us, and we're beginning to see the front end of what Frederic is going to be like as he arrives in the Mobile area. Those 6 and 8 foot waves are only a prelude to what is in store for Dauphin Island as the evening wears on. The western end of the island is already underwater. The last of the residents on that end of the island came out by Army truck this morning. There is a ghostly look about this normally active island. Houses deserted, no traffic except law enforcement vehicles and a few who, like us, were staying until the last minute, planning to leave just before the causeway was closed. Even as those plans to close the causeway were being made, the winds were building. And Mobile County Sheriff Tom Purvis, after a tour of the island, told us that he was anticipating a rough night.
This never happened before, but I would imagine that this island is going to be underwater. I just drove about 5 miles of the west end, and it's completely underwater. We were in water up to doors in this pickup truck, and it's running from a point well back from the road. It's just not the road itself that's covered. And of course, the surf now is up probably, it's running waves of 6, 8, maybe 10 feet up on the beach now.
Only a handful of diehards, those who refuse to go, remain on the island. Everyone else, including sheriff's deputies, have evacuated the island. The island has now been sealed off and lies awaiting the fury of Hurricane Frederic. Dave Walker, TV10 Newsbeat.
Night was bearing down on us, and so was Frederic. It had become obvious that our viewing area would bear the brunt of the storm. At 6 o'clock on September 12th, the TV10 Newsbeat crews moved to a live remote location to relay information and to show the force of the arriving hurricane.
I think right now, Wayne, it'd be safer to narrow it down. Mobile is definitely a prime area. A good possibility that this system could hit 50 miles either side of Mobile Bay right now. At the present time, it's only 80 miles south of the Alabama coast. Let's take a look now at the latest coordinates as we have them as of 6 p.m. this evening.
There would be no escaping Frederic's fury. Governor Fob James set up a command post on the eastern shore. The first of hundreds of National Guardsmen arrived. Law enforcement officials worked as long as they could to aid the evacuation. Then the order came for everyone to seek shelter. Frederic had arrived.
Stairwell might blow out.
None of us will ever forget that night. For the rest of our lives, we will tell where we were and what we experienced as Frederic's winds of destruction descended upon us. The trees that had provided so much of the area's beauty had been used by Frederic as battering rams to destroy homes and businesses.
Rescuers had to make their way past fallen trees to a stranded area on Ramsey Road near I-10. A 4-year-old girl was killed hours before they got there when a trailer reportedly fell on top of her. At this same hour of the night, the evacuation center began to empty as winds died down. For many, the trip home took hours. Trees blocked all roads leading south, but work crews moved fast. When roads did open, they led to more of the same destruction of homes and businesses. This, the Northfield Shopping Center. When Hurricane Frederic stormed ashore here in Bayou La Batterie, its strong winds and high tides turned houses like this one into so much rubble.
I don't know, everything gone.
What do you do now?
I think if we can clear this place up, we'll go back to Tennessee.
This was to have been his retirement home. Another family returned to find their house in much the same shape.
And they tell me that part of our house is on the back side of that road there. I haven't been back there. Yeah, and my tree's still standing. Is that silly? See the crooked tree?
Rosemary Kremen says living on the coast, they expected this, but she says that doesn't make the job ahead of them any easier. Reporting from South Mobile County, I'm Herb Williams, TV 10 Newsbeat.
The day's weather seemed designed to provide contrast to what lay before us. The sun was shining, the sky blue, temperatures in the high 80s, a perfect coastal day, all to frame the initial estimates of more than $1 billion in damages. From every coastal town and community across the 3 states, the TV 10 Newsbeat crews began to bring back the stories, and the stories would continue for days.
Spanish Fork's pine forest tumbled onto houses during Frederic, but today the twisted trunks were being removed free of charge. Scott paper workers armed with a giant claw began clearing out yards of many residents here, bringing sunlight into the pine shrubbed area. Many of these men would be off today, but they volunteered to help out. In Daphne, residents were out surveying the damage of tree-covered lanes and neighborhoods. Electricity has been restored here, and a no-burn order has been issued. The small community is being helped out with its cleanup by rescue units from North Alabama, in town assisting local agencies.
Do you think because Daphne is a smaller town that maybe y'all have been overlooked a little bit?
I feel like we have in looking at some of the other areas and some of the help that they've gotten. We, of course, have gotten in a couple of rescue squads from the other parts of the state this morning, but I don't feel like we've been looked at and given the help we need.
There was no flooding here, but the wind damage was extensive. One example, the Daphne Middle School gym. One of the most sentimental losses here in Daphne is the old Methodist Church. It's been here over 100 years, a landmark to people who live around here, built back in the 1840s, but almost destroyed by Fred. Downtown Fairhope was bustling today as the power was on and cleanup crews were out. Again, wind was the culprit here, ripping up businesses but claiming no injuries. A shipment of that crystal clear luxury called ice was in town, and people lined up for the popular chunks brought in from Atlanta.
It feels wonderful. We've been living in pioneer days, haven't we?
There's one saying that just a minute ago that they could get $10 a bag for it.
Is that right? So you're glad then to be back with them?
Sure, I'm glad to be in civilization again.
On the bay, the Fairhope Pier survived the storm, but Frederic made his mark on shore. The familiar buzz of the chainsaw was heard here as residents cut their way out of their yards.
I'm still a little shocked at the damage and all done to it. And I go around Fairhope and it's hard to believe. It's like a dream or something. Because Fairhope is just wiped out. No trees left hardly, and it scares me, really.
The Eastern Shore has long been known for its beauty, a kind of quiet getaway place to come and just sit by the bay. Well, Frederic may have taken away part of that, but out of his destruction, a new beauty has unfolded here. A bond between the people, of reaching out and helping each other and learning to rebuild for the future together. Carolyn Martin, TV 10 Newsbeat.
Most people are counting their blessings today because there is no question that the Gulf Coast has been lucky. The port city was struck hardest by Hurricane Frederic, and yet the death count is relatively low. However, that's not to say that Mobilians haven't suffered. 125,000 homes are still without power, and many have no water. City crews are busy trying to clear broken tree limbs from the main roads, but it will be some time before they get to side streets. Those people who have power saws aren't waiting for the city. They've already begun clearing fallen trees from the streets and property. And while many people are cleaning up and tallying the damage for insurance companies, there are others with more immediate concerns, such as finding food to eat. Long lines at emergency facilities like this one from Louisiana indicate a number of people have found their food supplies dwindling.
Lose everything. And my son, I got a little boy that I'm worried about and everything. And I'm just broken heart up about, all this. And I just couldn't believe it, it happened.
Have you been able to get enough food for your family and yourself?
Well, just barely enough,
Do you think you're going to have to start depending on the emergency relief food soon?
Yes, we certainly have.
My freezer's out and my food is destroying, and I have a lot of vegetables and stuff in there, but they're going to bad because I don't have any way to keep them.
Downtown, like everywhere else, is in shambles. A lot of damage the result of Hurricane Frederic, and a lot of it from looters. Mobile looks like it's been through a war, and in a sense it has, and it's not over yet. We're faced with still another fight, trying to clean up and get our lives back to normal. And that battle could take several weeks. Renee Dowles, TV 10 Newsbeat.
The winds began picking up in Pascagoula about dark last night. The area hasn't really been touched by a hurricane for 10 years, since Camille. But most people here still remember that storm, and by dark, most had cleared out. Many of those that stayed went to emergency shelters. As the winds continued to build through the night, the people taking cover in Pascagoula High School kept watch at the front entrance. Just as those inside were settling down for the night, the eye passed, indicating the storm center came closer to Pascagoula than to Mobile. With dawn, the awesome destruction that Frederic unleashed on the coast became very apparent. Here in Pascagoula, there's no power or water anywhere in the city. Here at the shelter where cameraman Larry Sherling and I spent the night, the scene outside is one of devastation. This morning, almost all roads were blocked by debris. US 90 remained open, but was clogged with sightseers. Officials are asking that everyone stay off the roads unless necessary. Police say 90% of the stores in town have windows out or worse. National Guard troops have been called in to control looting. The problem was reportedly severe last night. Police have made 6 arrests. Evacuees had to be moved out of this and 2 other emergency shelters last night when their roofs partially collapsed. But Pascagoula was lucky. There were no reported deaths and few injuries. Now comes the immense task of cleaning up and, for some, starting over. In Pascagoula, I'm Alan Green, TV 10 Newsbeat.
At first glance, what's left of this popular beachfront resort area reminds one of a war zone. Everywhere you look, there is total devastation. Residents say there's not a house or business that escaped damage. Beachgoers will probably remember this used to be Highway 98 rolling along the oceanfront. Right now, it's at least shoulder deep in white sand. The incredible ocean surge from the hurricane literally moved motels across the street and replanted them in the front yards of summer homes. Today, 6 days after the hurricane hit, cleanup is slow but steady. Residents are trying to put the pieces back together, but the memory of what used to be still hurts the most.
Tore up, that's all.
Is it going to take you a while to rebuild?
Well, it'll take me a while, yeah. I am. Still in the days.
Other residents complain Gulf Shores was isolated after the storm, and despite the help of National Guard troops, disaster assistance has been slow. Destruction is everywhere. The concrete Gulf Shores Convention Center's entire first floor is a total loss, while just down the beach, wooden homes like this one were pushed and shoved around like dominoes. Vital services are still out. Phone lines remain down, and work crews can't even find the sewer lines. There is also confusion at City Hall over leadership of the stricken community, so Governor James appointed Dick Forrester to direct the disaster relief services.
We have about 60% of the main power lines are functioning. These are the main lines that are, and as they move along the main line, they'll feed off to any house that is capable of taking power. There is water for in most, other than along the beach road, but north of the beach road, there is water. All of it is not drinkable, but in the whole north part of the city now it is. We're working with the people in Orange Beach, and their water, they all have water, but it's not drinkable. And I make that point to them, that don't drink the water. The curfew, we've moved it up now from, it was 5 at night till 7 in the morning. We're now operating from 7 at night to 7 in the morning because of our unique situation out here and great areas that are not accessible. The security is very, very tight.
And to get the cleanup detail further underway, Gulf Shores residents will be happy to know federal disaster assistance will be available here beginning tomorrow, and it will be located at the Gulf Shores Old Community Center here on Old Highway 59. In Gulf Shores, I'm Laurel Sauer, TV 10 Newsbeat.
Only from the air could one begin to really understand what Frederic's winds of destruction had done. Dauphin Island was almost completely destroyed. By some miracle, 26 people who had elected to stay on the island survived, just barely. The Dauphin Island Marina was in shambles. The causeway, the only link to the island, was destroyed. The few slabs of concrete still connecting the causeway pilings looked like playing cards tossed out by a giant dealer. The causeway bridge was gone, lying somewhere beneath the water. Price tag for reconstruction of the causeway alone estimated at $30 million. Everywhere one looked, there was destruction. And at Civil Defense Headquarters, as officials gathered to assess the crisis, they were faced with a constant barrage of major decisions. Two very important ones came quickly. There had been reports of looting, and Governor Fob James responded harshly.
James says he does expect the area to be declared a national disaster area, providing the opportunity for low-interest loans. The governor also talked about providing aid to those in need of it, and he issued a stern warning to anyone who might be thinking of taking advantage of those who have suffered the ravages of Hurricane Frederic.
I want to say right now, we have troopers in the field, we have armed guardsmen in the field, and any person desiring to do anything along the lines of looting of any kind or vandalism will be dealt with in the most severe manner, without any hesitation, without equivocation. The sheriff of this county, the commissioners of this county, the city officials of Mobile, and the same in Baldwin County, and the people are not going to tolerate vandalism or looting 1 iota. I want to say it again. Any parties, even thinking any such thoughts, you're taking your own life in hand, because we're going to deal with you in the most severe fashion.
The governor stopped just short of saying the guardsmen and state police have orders to shoot to kill, Not so Pritchard Mayor Jay Cooper, who moments later said he has issued orders to his men that they should fire 2 warning shots to stop suspected looters, and that should that fail, they should shoot to kill. Police and guardsmen in all the affected areas will be especially watchful as the 7 p.m. curfew goes into effect tonight. Dave Walker, TV 10 News Beat.
And there were reports of price gouging and profiteering. Again, officials responded quickly.
The second ordinance is one which deals with the price gouges, the profiteers who are selling essential things like ice and generators and gasoline and candles and the type of thing, flashlight batteries, and are gouging the public by charging 2 or 3 or 4 times what the price should be. We had no legal ground, at least up until now, to do anything about it, but we passed this ordinance which makes it illegal for them to sell more than the normal average retail price, any merchandise, the normal average price that was 90 days ago. In other words, if something sold, if a generator was $200 90 days ago, it ought to be $200 today, or close to $200. So if they are found guilty of profiteering, they are subject to arrest, they're subject to a fine of $500 or more, and 6 months in jail, perhaps 2. This is, I think, one of the worst crimes of all for somebody to come in and take advantage of a disaster. It's just sort of it just makes your blood run cold.
Okay, you got to move this one out of here. The profiteering ordinance came in part as a result of those who were selling ice for $4 a bag. And even for those who were selling at a fair price, such as this A&P on Airport Boulevard, there were problems. The need for ice was so great and the lines became so long, and there were those few who refused to wait their turn, that police and National Guardsmen were called in. There was concern for a time on that first day that the crowds would get out of hand.
Y'all back it up, man. Back it up. Y'all back on up. Back up. Let's go. Yeah, we were in the line when you was back on up. Back up. Back on up.
The end result of those problems was the takeover of ice distribution by local authorities. Distribution points were established and ice was handed out free under police supervision. The reports of looting continued. A 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. curfew was declared. National Guardsmen joined law enforcement officers in patrolling all the areas affected by Hurricane Frederic. The curfew would stay in effect for more than a week. In the end, the amount of looting and profiteering would be considered minimal, but the end result may well have come because of quick action by those officials involved. Those were only a few of the events of that first day. Even as elected officials and civil defense workers began that first day preparing for our safety and providing some of the basic essentials, the residents of the areas hit by the storm began cutting their way out from under all the debris. It was a monstrous, almost impossible undertaking. The numbers can't tell all the story, but they are staggering. A preliminary survey showed 2,118 homes destroyed by Frederic. 4,350 received major damage, 34,314 received minor damage. Pascagoula Police Chief Owen Davis reported that 85% of the businesses in that city had the front end or the rear end blown out by the storm.
There you go.
The utility companies, Alabama Power and South Central Bell, were particularly hard hit by the storm. There was at first no electrical power and few telephones working. Alabama Power, within days after the storm, had beefed up its normal operating staff to a total near 2,000 workmen. And lights began to come on around the city. But for the hardest hit areas, it would be weeks before power was restored and life began to return to normal. President Carter led the vanguard of what would become an army of federal relief officials who would come to the area, bringing with them the tools to aid in rebuilding. Low-interest home and business loans, the Army Corps of Engineers manpower to aid in debris removal, food stamps for the victims. The helicopter tour started in Mobile and moved to Pascagoula, where one stop was at Ingalls Shipyards, a major employer in the area that suffered $10 million in damages.
Go ahead. We have both a representative from Washington of the Corps and also the regional direct to the Corps.
Well, now, the Corps said they couldn't show till Monday, Mr. President, and we need them before Monday. This thing
The
is...
big trees especially, they block other
The big
things.
stuff.
The big trees. Municipalities in the county simply don't have that heavy of equipment to remove that kind of material.
Do you have a construction battalion in the National Guard?
Yes, we do.
They work in the base of Gulfport.
Yes, and then we have the CB base.
We have all of us setting up. We're setting a headquarters in Osier Springs for the feds and the statewide people, and then, of course, local people will be in each community.
Except I'm going to leave my best man down here with you.
You're right. Ain't no question about it. He was one of the best in the world. No question about that. If Jack wasn't standing over there, I'd say the best.
We'll be glad
Well,
to have him.
if you have any problem with the Corps of Engineers question, just let Jack know or me know, and we'll take care of it right away. I know the Corps is eager to help, and they'll cooperate fully.
The tour continued along the coastline over Dauphin Island to Pensacola, Florida, where the president promised quick federal action that would continue as long as needed.
President Carter ended his tour of the three-state disaster area here at Sherman Field at the Pensacola Naval Air Station. Hundreds were on hand to greet the president, who said he wanted to come to the area personally and see to it the residents of the Gulf Coast area get the help they need to rebuild quickly.
The damage is extremely severe, and the federal commitment to helping all of you and all those who were damaged repair what has been done and restore the quality of your lives is complete, and it's permanent. But we are dedicated to provide unemployment compensation for those who are not presently employed because of a loss of their jobs because of damage, low interest loans for homes, low interest loans to repair businesses, help for farmers who've lost their crops, and we're trying now to restore the vital services, transportation, electric power, telephones, working with the private organizations for power and telephones that are doing so well.
Florida Governor Bob Graham, along with other Florida and Alabama officials, accompanied the president on his aerial tour and said the entire damage in northwest Florida would be assessed sometime next week.
What Florida had to take was primarily water damage. In the areas in Alabama and Mississippi where they got the bulk of the wind damage, you had much more interior destruction.
Meanwhile, cars lined the Pensacola Beach Bridge on Highway 98 and Gulf Breeze all day long today as residents who evacuated returned home for the first time to check out the damage. Even though most of Escambia County escaped the direct thrust of Hurricane Frederic's destructive winds, local officials say the east end of Pensacola Beach and the Perdido Key area are among the hardest hit. Some of the homes look like William Miller's summer house. Others, like Miller's next-door neighbor, weren't quite as lucky.
Well, I'm very shocked, but I'm very thankful that it's not our home. It's just a summer home.
Yeah. What do you plan to do now?
It looks like we're going to bulldoze it down and rebuild.
National Guard troops were on hand to help residents clean up and protect against looting, while power crews from as far away as Atlanta, Georgia worked long shifts trying to restore electricity and running water to beach residents. Officials said most power had been restored to the stricken beach area by late today, and officials added strict curfew conditions would be in effect on Pensacola Beach from 8 o'clock tonight until 6 o'clock in the morning, until early sometime next week. In Pensacola, I'm Laurel Sauer, TV 10 Newsbeat.
Several days later, the federal relief effort arrived, and Mobilians and other Gulf Coast residents were once again faced with lines. Long, slow-moving, wait-all-day lines. Lines became a major part of the aftermath of Hurricane Frederic. The federal relief centers also house the various other agencies, both governmental and volunteer, that offer services to Fredric's victims. And for those in the lines, the waiting seemed endless.
The doors to the assistance centers opened this morning for the first time at 10. The normal hours for the 9 coastal Alabama centers will be 10 till 7 Monday through Saturday and 1 till 7 Sundays. The crowds were at all the centers this morning looking for one or more forms of help. But like almost everything else in Mobile since Frederic, getting that help takes a lot of waiting.
I stayed up for about 9 hours yesterday and I'm about tired. But I need this, so that's why.
Standing in lines getting to be kind of a way of life.
Oh, yes, it is.
Once inside the centers, a wide range of disaster assistance is available. Applications for food stamps are taken. You need to bring ID and proof of residence with you to apply for the food stamps. Unemployment compensation is available for anyone who lost his job for any amount of time because of the storm. Bring payroll records for the past 18 months to apply. Paycheck stubs are okay. There is temporary housing assistance available for those who had to move out of their homes because of storm damage. There are also low-interest small business administration loan application forms for homeowners and small businessmen who suffer damages, and special grants for those homeowners who can't qualify for the SBA loans. You need to bring proof of residence with you to apply. If you suffered uninsured losses from the storm, you can refile last year's income tax for an immediate refund. Help with that return is available at the centers. Be sure to bring your 1978 tax return with you. Application for free debris removal is available from the Corps of Engineers. You have to own your own home to qualify for this. Also available is special aid for those who can't get help from the other agencies. These centers will remain open as long as people are still coming in for the services. But it's a long, hot wait, and those of you who can afford to may consider putting off coming down here until some of the lines start clearing out. Alan Green, TV 10 Newsbeat.
The line stretches for about a mile. Hot, tired people waiting to get inside. They're out of food, out of shelter, and out of patience.
Been here since 5:30 this morning, and I'm tired, and this is the third day, and I'm not giving up this time.
Once inside, the waiting continues and the confusion begins. Anyone in Jackson County who suffered loss from Frederic must come here to report. More people showed up than anticipated, but Governor Cliff Finch says help is on the way. Have they already said from Washington you will get relief?
I'm trying to get it through now in Washington. Yes, part of the officials said we're getting it. I know we're going to get it, and I'm getting a call into the White House now and see if we can't get some emergency measures for this right now.
Many of these people have been waiting for days to get food stamps, business loans, and other help. Today they reported their damage.
And glass, you're not going to be able to sit on it because glass is just, when it hit the back door, it was glass, and it just chipped. And it, put holes in the lines of the air conditioning and all that stuff. We're not going to be able to live in that part of the house for a while.
Do your family have any future plans of how you're going to fix up your home? Or
according to what the insurance does, that's the first thing. And from there, I don't know.
For some here, the relief is on the way tonight, but for others, the waiting has just begun. Part of the reason for the chaos here today is because everyone showed up at the same time. The various emergency agencies say they are already one day behind in processing the people who are here. And they say that anyone else who needs help in Pascagoula should wait till the end of the week to come into the center. In Pascagoula, Carolyn Martin, TV 10 Newsbeat.
More than 1,000 people lined up at the unemployment office here on Church Street. By noon today, the office had already closed its doors, and these few men were the only ones left. They were waiting for a chance to pick up any sort of work for the day. The office has about 1,000 jobs available in cleanup operations, but CETA, which funds those jobs, can only handle about 200 applicants a day. So the office will be open at 8 o'clock tomorrow to take more applications for those jobs. About 1,500 people showed up this afternoon at the food stamp office on North Broad Street. These people waited in the sun for hours, hoping to get the stamps they need to get the food they need to feed their families. Police and National Guardsmen, who had to disperse the crowd earlier this morning, stood watch with guns ready. But this afternoon's lines were orderly, and the process went off without a hitch. The food stamp office has set up several locations around the city to deal with stamp registration, and they should be getting in an emergency supply of the stamps from Washington. Not everyone is getting the stamps. New regulations say the people who want them have to meet certain income guidelines. But if you do meet those guidelines, getting the stamps should be no trouble. People who run the food stamp program are deciding now where to put the offices tomorrow. There could be at least 4, maybe more of them. When they make that decision, we'll tell you. At the food stamp office, Mike Sampson, TV 10 Newsbeat.
It has been the same since the day after the storm. Those long lines, whether for ice or gasoline or food stamps or federal loans or food or clothing, no matter the need, there has been a line. It has been a time of stress. Tempers were getting short and patience wearing thin. But by far, the majority of people have realized that the storm, Frederic's winds of destruction, are at fault for those trying times, not the system that creates long lines. The long line simply became a part of a bad memory that will come to mind when someone mentions Frederic. It is perhaps difficult to look about us even now and find a lot to be thankful for, at first anyway. Then any number of things come to mind. What about all those volunteer agencies that came to town? The Red Cross, the Mennonites, and a number of other religious organizations. And what about all those reports of not organizations but individuals who came to town to help? What about some of our elected officials who had to make some hard, cold decisions about evacuation and about safety and profiteering and about providing ice? More than 20 million pounds of ice was distributed free of charge. Some of us met our neighbors. If not for the first time, we did get to know them a lot better. What about our neighbors from across the state and across the nation? When a plea was made for food and clothing, the response was an outpouring, not only of those commodities, but of one human being's concern for another. What about the tireless efforts of law enforcement officials and National Guardsmen, many of whom spent their time protecting our lives and property while their own families and homes waited? And all those civil defense volunteers.
It will take months before we really learn all that took place here at Civil Defense Headquarters during this emergency. But for the most part, we know that hundreds of volunteers did an outstanding job of protecting the people from the fury of Hurricane Frederic and in providing the necessary emergency services needed to sustain life. We know that the Mobile Amateur Radio Club worked 24 hours a day and serviced over 20,000 radio telephone calls, either relaying messages or patching through calls all over the world. County Commissioner Bay Hayes said that the center will now start to gear down, and local businesses and governments will get back to normal. The federal disaster forces, he said, will now take over the job of reconstruction. Commissioner Bob Doyle was asked about the continued need of the National Guard.
Guard presence is needed now more than ever, and we have appealed to the governor and asked him directly if he would consider the situation and think about it before he pulls any units out.
And so civil defense will now start to phase down, and the hundreds and hundreds of people who gave so unselfishly of their time will now be able to go home and care for their own problems created by Hurricane Frederic. This is Dick Darby, TV 10 Newsbeat.
Yes, it will be a long time before the scars caused by Frederic will disappear. Some of them never will. But there are things to be thankful for. On that Sunday morning following the storm in churches all across Frederick's path, many of them heavily damaged by its winds of destruction, people gathered to express their thanks.
This Sunday morning, after Hurricane Frederic struck the port city, many Mobilians were in church, thankful for their lives and whatever possessions they still own. The congregation at the Trinity Episcopal Church on Dauphin Street conducted their service in the annex. Sunlight poured through a gaping hole in the front section where part of the front roof and wall had caved in under Frederic's forceful winds. A few blocks down the street, Central Presbyterian Church was also severely damaged. Church members met in nearby Bellingrath Memorial Hall to try to worship the best way they could. Many in the congregation were shocked to see what was left of their church after the hurricane's powerful winds. Many saw the damage today for the first time. Perhaps the greatest loss were the windows. 4 giant stained glass windows which now lay shattered on the ground. They are irreplaceable.
The east window was out, but when I came down here and saw daylight through the church, I almost collapsed.
Start all over again, just like we did at the beginning.
You think it'll pull the congregation even more together?
I think a little closer, a little closer.
And while church services were going on inside, cleanup crews were busy outside, moving debris and patching up the roof, trying to return the churches to some form of working order. Despite the difficulties caused by Hurricane Frederic, people here in Mobile are trying to add back some degree of normalcy into their lives again. While workmen are outside clearing away debris, churches are still holding worship services, no matter what the conditions. I'm Laurel Sauer, TV 10 Newsbeat.
The loss of any one life is so tragic as to defy any measurement, but using the numbers that we live by every day, one can only say that the residents who lived in the area attacked by Hurricane Frederic are lucky. The numbers of our neighbors who died, when compared to Hurricane Camille, are relatively small. We have also experienced the caring and the graciousness of our neighbors in this state and all across the nation. And we've also had an opportunity to test our own mettle. We have shown that we have the ability to endure, the ability to exist, and the ability to rebuild. Out of all of this has come a stronger sense of community. Frederick's winds of destruction have gone. They're no longer with us. And they left behind a clear sky and a promise for a better tomorrow.